Chapter 1891. Just leave them there. Miss Kara, would you be so kind as to return the core of the pocket dimension? It should be in its secure room in the treasure vault. Oh, that one's still there. It's a fake. The real one was in that guy's pocket. But I'll leave it behind when I go, like a treasure hunt. Then, Kara vanished, hiding the core of the world, only to return a few seconds later. All right, the treasure hunt is ready. It'll give you all something to do while we're gone. Carl, would you be so good as to take us back? You'll have to move us to the Chaos Plane because we're 15 galaxies away from where we started. Carl bowed to the elves. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an experience. But now I must return to work. I do hope that we can meet under better circumstances next time. You know where to find us if you do want to visit. Of course, guild leader. Do try to enjoy your afternoon. Carl opened a portal to the Chaos Plane, where Kara could lead them more easily home, and stepped through. The moment that Kara was through, he closed the portal, and the badger began to laugh as she opened another portal and sent Veda back to the guild house. Oh, they're going to have so much fun there, she laughed. Carl nodded. Well, there are other elves, so they can't claim that we didn't leave them around their own people. That only made Carl laugh harder. Did you even check what sort of elves they were? Carl shrugged. Elves? Pointy-eared. There were some dark elves too, but mostly the other sort. Kara's laughter turned into a scheming smile that boded ill for the residents of that pocket dimension. They're all spider goddess and dragon god followers. Every planet in that system has been fully claimed by one of the two gods, and most of them are the forest elves who have very strong feelings about the sort of arrogant high elves who keep slaves. Even if they weren't followers of the green dragon. I'm sure that they've noticed the intruder in the area already, as the pocket dimension isn't particularly well hidden. They were relying on being a speck of sand in the grand scheme of things to remain undiscovered. So, they're going to have more visitors soon, and they're going to have a lovely time trying to explain the situation to the others. Carl chuckled. If I'd been thinking, I should have informed them. An avatar opening a portal to the Chaos Plane will alert everyone who has their senses open that something is going on where there should be nothing. I'm sure it won't be long. Where did you leave the core of the pocket dimension anyhow? In the stone under a latrine in the woodcutters district. Well, that was somewhere that nobody would think to look for it. Now, how do we get back to the guild house?
Carl asked, changing the topic.
I thought that we could go on a small adventure first.
Oh, yes.
I left a recording stone there for Opal so that she can watch their tiny world get rearranged by angry elves. But there is a fun thing on one of those planets that we should go visit. It's an entire dungeon full of giants. Wait, do you think that you can pretend to be an elf or a beastkin? We need to be sneaky to get past that demigod that's monitoring the entrance.
Carl sighed.
Am I not beastkin enough right now? Carl looked at him dubiously. Well, you've got ears and fur, but you don't really look beastkin. Everyone keeps taking you as a demon, probably because of the black eyes thing. But even without that, you can barely pass as beastkin. Well, in that case, I'll have to work to blend in. Perhaps I can convince people that I'm an elf. Kara smirked. Oh, that would be fun to see. All the Supremes can sense someone's age just by being near them. In elf years, we're both toddlers. Carl could see the chaos that would cause. Who would let an elf, who was the equivalent of an elementary schooler in a mostly grown body, out into a dungeon unsupervised? At least if he was pretending to be a beastkin, they would likely let him through. Is there a reason that we're doing this alone? We're not. Ray is still in her space and Leo. That's 4 of us. Nearly enough for a regular group. Good enough for me. Give me 2 minutes, and I will find the right skill for this. His first thought was to merge something, but bestial form that created the snow war tiger form that he was using right now was a common grade skill. If he wanted to be less beast, improving the spell wouldn't be likely to lead in the right direction. So he would try to alter it in a sideways direction. Using Skill Merger, Carl tried to combine bestial form with fox charm, hoping for something like Dana's fox-eared mostly human form. Tion had high hopes for that skill. Fox form created. Carl transformed, and Kara whistled in the sort of catcall that Carl was more familiar with drunkards and idiots directing at Dana. She brought up a mirror, and Carl laughed as he saw his reflection in the new fox form. He still had his human face, but his eyes were now more like Tion's. Bright blue, slightly glowing, and angled in a way that said there was no way he was anything but a troublemaking playboy. On Tion's juvenile human form, it was adorable. On Carl, it would make people naturally want to lock their women and children inside, then follow them, just in case even the men weren't safe from his attentions. He also had 9 long, fluffy white tails. Not just 1, but 9. And long, fluffy white ears. Well, I must say that nobody will question my relationship to Tion at this point. Carl laughed. If we brought the Dana mage, they would all think it was a family outing with an adopted daughter. Now that was going to be a fun prank for later. Chapter 1892. Transformed for stealth. Well, now that I'm transformed and I should be able to blend in with the crowd, where are we off to? Distances in the chaos plane are a bit odd. Kara took his hand and smiled. Follow me into a world of wild adventures. Then, she moved them out of the chaos plane and into a crowded city's shopping district. There was magic everywhere. That was the first thing that Carl noticed. The second thing that he noticed was that everyone was turning to stare at him. Everyone. So, he took Kara's hand and led her toward an ice cream shop. If you wanted to bribe the badger to do things directly, it worked better when she wasn't hungry. They stepped up to the counter and Carl smiled at the clerk, who immediately blushed, then swooned, nearly fainting at the force of his smile. Carl checked Fox Charm and found that it was suppressed to the absolute minimum, as low as Dana kept hers on a daily basis. So, that shouldn't be the issue. Good morning, Mississippi. Can we get 2 waffle bowls of chocolate, raspberry mint with marshmallows? The other clerk on duty, a young man of a floppy-eared dog-type bloodline, frowned at the order. There was something wrong with that man's taste buds. But he began to mix the ingredients for the order, while the cashier tried to recover from Carl's presence. She would be fine, as long as he didn't smile at her again. Yes, that was the cause of the issue. She was sure of it. Carl handed her a golden dark light host-marked coin as she stood frozen, and then gently closed her hand around it, trying not to laugh at the stunned expression on her face. That was it, the little half-smile was too much. And she's out. I've got her. You just finish our ice cream, and I will lead the Carl away so he doesn't cause more trouble. Kara insisted. The clerk nodded and moved as fast as he could to finish the order. His day had gone incredibly sideways if he was being assured by a badger that she would be the one keeping others from causing trouble. It really didn't get more surreal than this. But a moment later, Carl and Kara were back on the street, among the crowd of shoppers, who were doing their best to make a space around the pair. I guess sitting and talking is out. Let's just find that dungeon you wanted to see, Carl insisted. Kara happily crunched on the bowl of the snack, turning the whole thing sideways to eat it, without using a spoon. How she kept the ice cream from falling out was a mystery, but Carl didn't try to stop her, as she was attracting a bit of the attention away from him. It's just over here, right on the edge of the shopping district, but there are guards, and I didn't want to appear right in front of them and cause a misunderstanding. Carl nodded and followed her lead, until they got to a pair of Forest Elven Supremes, standing in front of the entrance to what looked like a park. State your business. We would like to enter the dungeon for training, Kara insisted. The man looked back and forth between the two of them for nearly 10 seconds before he spoke again. There are only 2 of you, and no healer. I will advise against this, but the rules say that if you pay, you enter. Standard system rate, 50 coins per group. Kara handed over 50 Darklight host-marked coins, and the man shook his head. We have a healer on duty outside the portal. Don't be shy to use her services when you get back out. Her healing services, mind you. Healing only. That last part was directed firmly at Carl, who gave him an elegant bow. I can assure you that I will be a perfect gentleman. The other guard winked at him. That's the part that he's worried about. He might have a point. The combination of good manners and fox charm was a deadly one. Even Dana had started learning to be more assertive with people, just so they didn't misunderstand her. Being a fox was hard. They walked through the immaculately manicured elven gardens and stopped at the short line for the dungeon, where Carl immediately caught the attention of the groups in line. Sir, are you here to join one of the pickup groups? We can arrange for you to go with a more powerful team if you're here for experience building, a kindly-looking elven supreme asked. Oh, I had intended to go alone with my badger. But if there are open groups, I don't mind entering with some others. It might be a fun experience to do new things with new friends. The man smiled at Carl's enthusiasm, knowing that pickup groups for peak immortal dungeons were guaranteed to be a mess every single time. But this dungeon was worse. It scaled with the members, all the way up to mid-supreme. Supreme-ranked bosses got 99% damage reduction against immortals, just like any other supreme. So, if an immortal group was too close to peak, they could pull an advanced boss and end up in huge trouble running for the exit. But on the other hand, they could deliberately send Supremes into the dungeon to bump the difficulty and have a dungeon that would work for two distinctly different groups of fighters. That was a rarity anywhere. Alright, we have a group of 6 who are fairly confident in themselves at mid-ascended. How is your combat power? They're looking for damage. Carl nodded. I am an avatar of the World Dragon, and I have many summoning-based skills. The group cheered as they heard the news. That was precisely what they were short on. More damage to deal with the giants. Oh, and I can do group defensive and support buffs as well. The basics like strength, damage, eternal lightning barriers, and such. Well then, friend, welcome. Let's get this started before we lose our spot in the queue. Chapter 1893. Titan Dungeon. Carl checked the group and found that it was almost all elven rangers and druids, with one Werbear berserker at the lead. Not a lot of diversity, but not warriors. Then he realized that there were 3 members of his group. That was a huge improvement over most places, but the more that Carl looked around the area, the more he noticed that the elves suffered from a glut of rangers the way that the humans suffered from too many warriors. And not even beast rangers. Just the regular, unadvanced version, but with a tag that called them Elven Rangers. Greetings, Carl of the Darklight host. Might we ask how your actual combat power is? It's challenging to tell your true power level, but you still feel like you're at the peak of Void Immortal with an incredibly powerful physique. Carl nodded. That should be close, I think. But my true power comes from the summoned golems and my bonded beasts. There is a blood destruction spider that will join us once we are inside, so her presence doesn't mess up the team member count. The dungeons only count her separately when she enters on her own. The ranger nodded. He understood the concept, as it happened to rangers who had bonded monsters. Alright, we will take you along. It might weaken the bosses a bit, but that's not always a bad thing, as it helps lower the risk of accidentally pulling a supreme-ranked boss. That was the point when Carl understood perfectly why Kara wanted to go to this dungeon. If the team was already on the verge of pulling a supreme-ranked boss, and then you added Carl and Kara, the resultant chaos and blessing of the World Dragon would almost definitely cause it to advance, even without having to do anything on their part. They all stepped into the dungeon, and Carl briefly regretted that he hadn't stopped Kara from sending away the blue dragon. She would have loved what was about to happen here. So, I don't suppose that any of you have arachnophobia, do you? Carl asked, before waking Ray for the fight. No, we're good. There are spider goddess followers in this region as well. Carl chuckled as he began calling out his golems. First regular, then the Sero-form greater golems, followed by Oathbreaker as epic golems, since he didn't want to offend the elves by calling kings or high priestesses, and anything else would be too large for the situation. Then his Lamia-form bodyguards, with the Haint Claw and the Haint-shaped Epic Guard to lead their team. The Army of the Dead brought out a dozen Spectral Knights, and then Carl called on the Army of Nature's Vengeance and grabbed 10 Dryad Queens. That's a spectacular number of summons. No wonder you weren't concerned about being dead weight, even if the fight was a bit over your level, the Berserker noted. Oh, we've not started the fun part yet. Meet the Lady Ray Bloodbath. She will be leading the Arachnid Infiltration team. Ray appeared with her pair of golems, then her spectral knights joined Carl's. But the real spectacle was the 100 diamondback rock spiders that Carl called to join her. Gah, no wonder you asked if we were arachnophobic. That is a lot of spiders. Are they some sort of illusion? Carl shook his head. No, they're a form of golem. They only have 2 basic attack skills, but it's more than enough for them to do their jobs. One is a sticky web, the other is toxic strikes. Unless something in here is immune to poison and control, they should be fine. You did say that it's all giants or members of the Titan clans, I suppose. So, this fight shouldn't be anything that they're going to struggle too much with. Even better, the targets are large enough to be swarmed. For a second, they didn't understand. Then, Ray spotted the first group of giants, a pair of four-armed titans who had their backs turned to the entrance and were joking with each other. 101 spiders launched through the air at speeds that were very close to supersonic and slammed into the titans hard enough to take them both to the ground, where they were wrapped in sticky webbing while being repeatedly stabbed. Then, both of them simply exploded, as Ray used blood destruction to finish them off. Holy shit, right? She's incredibly stabby. The group stared at Carl as if there were something wrong with his brain. Stabby didn't even begin to explain what had just happened to a pair of peak immortal titans. Then, the defeated giants rose as shambling zombies, blood golems raised by Ray to add to her army. Alright, so, what direction are we going? The berserker shook his head in dismay. That is the only way. The dungeon is one long path through the bosses. There isn't really an alternate route. Then we'd better hurry, or she's going to kill everything. The next group saw Ray coming, and dozens of spiders were swatted out of the way, with eternal lightning shattered by multiple giant blades. But the spiders themselves weren't heavily injured, and Carl was continually reinforcing the barriers, which were back up within seconds. He's not kidding. That spider intends to clear this entire dungeon, one of the druids realized. And Carl hadn't even sent the rest of the team forward yet. The berserker led the charge and laughed as the spiders continued to swarm the frantically fighting titans. Move to the third group. We will leapfrog groups with the spiders, he instructed. That would also put his group in the front when it came time to fight the boss. Dealing with peak ascended immortal titans, who did easily 20 times the damage that the spiders did, was well within their capability just by pure numbers. But the boss was going to be a different story. Even if it wasn't pushed to Supreme, it was a Titan mage, and the area damage it could do if not properly controlled was enough to kill entire groups of unwary adventurers. Chapter 1894. Badger detected. The Dryads grabbed the next group, holding their arms in place as the Rangers unleashed their full fury on the giants. Without the ability to effectively fight back, the Titans were nothing more than target dummies, a pure damage output test for the group, as they didn't have to worry about the monsters changing their attention from the tank to the rest of the group. The Titans had combat skills, similar to Cleave, that would damage everyone in an arc in front of them, but they could only effectively activate them when they could swing their weapons. That wasn't something that most of the group had realized, as it wasn't really possible for most groups to actually immobilize them. A powerful ice mage might do it for few, but 10 Dryad Queens were more than enough, and the damage that the vines were doing had torn large gaps in the thick skin of the Titans. Damn, leave something for the rest of us to do. It's like you brought an entire army into the dungeon, the healer joked, as he found that he had nothing to do but add more damage. The Dryads had an area healing spell active, and it was more effective than the monsters they were fighting. Actually, what are you actually doing, other than carrying your son around to show him the dungeon? Carl laughed at the confused druid. This is Tion. He's a pure-blooded stone for a divine fox, and an excellent healer. We don't have much to do at the moment, but I'm mostly waiting for my mana to recover, since I spent 60,000 to summon all those constructs. That takes some time, even with gear that regenerates a percentage of my base every second. Tion nodded in agreement. Setting up for dungeons was incredibly expensive when you summoned so many Dryads. 2 was likely enough for them to handle most things, but they weren't going to see these people again, so this was the perfect opportunity to show off. Kara had climbed up the side of the giant, using the vines created by the Dryads as a ladder, and was currently casting Spatial Quake directly inside the creature's head, using a finger up the giant's nose as a point of access past its defensive barriers. The monster was well and truly enraged at this point, but also suffering from extreme brain damage and unable to remove the badger. That's unusual, the healer noted in a dry tone. Yes, actually it is. She's usually much more cruel to them. This way, They barely feel anything, as the spatial quake destroys their cognitive functions long before they die. Tion nodded along. Sister Kara knows all the best ways to make dungeons fun. While that wasn't as promising to the others as it was to Tion, the sentiment was there, and the elves were happy to have an easier-than-usual run thanks to Ray's spider horde and the crowd control of the Dryads. Now that he had been caught slacking, even Carl was joining in personally, using some mana to hurl Chaos Vortex spells at the giants. That spell was quite efficient, and wouldn't heavily affect his recovery, just in case he had to start summoning new constructs during the boss fights. This dungeon wasn't difficult so far, but if Kara had brought them here for entertainment, it would not stay easy. That suspicion was proven correct when they reached the altar that the first boss was standing on. Group composition outside of expected parameters. Recalculating difficulty. Damn it, you broke the dungeon. It very clearly says that we're fixing the dungeon. See, right there recalculating because it's outside of parameters. We found a bug and repaired it, so we get extra loot, Kara countered. That's not what that phrase means at all. And that is a Titan Archmage. If you bump the power much higher, that thing is going to cast a single area spell and wipe us all out before the fight even starts, one of the rangers countered. In that case, we send the golems. Oathbreaker loves picking fights with stupid things. Do you want to be big or little for this fight, Oathie? The four-armed obsession demon laughed hysterically at the prospect, already getting excited about the prospect of getting to fight something new. You gave the epic grade demon a nickname? I give everyone nicknames, it's just that most people don't like the ones that I pick, Kara countered. Fine, let's get this started. How bad could it be, right? Oh, don't ask that. I've still got a dungeon upgrade token that I'm itching to use. Kara laughed as Oathbreaker vanished and reappeared in behind the boss, who still appeared frozen in place. Actually, he's got a point. I'll give all the golems that can use them some elemental blade, magical weapons to buff them a bit more, and I'll keep the barriers up on everyone. And I've got my stick, Kara added, holding it up for everyone to see. It was the one that had come out strangely when upgraded to Peerless rank, and it was glorious. Poking Stick of Crippling Anxiety's cursed item. Immortal rank, Peerless grade. Adds a secondary effect to all skills that causes crippling anxiety to the target. The mere thought of retaliation or decision-making has a chance to cause paralysis, and any actions taken against the caster will cause crippling agony and have a chance to inflict a constant health drain of 1% maximum health per second for 10 seconds. Usable only by creatures of the Chaos Plane. Now that they had given Oathbreaker and the Dryads new swords, Ray was becoming concerned that her spiders were going to be substituted for humanoids. Then, she remembered the most important part. They were guard pets, and it cost extra to get intelligent ones. Though they were guardian-type constructs, so they could theoretically use the sword spell. If they had hands. Dungeon recalibrated. World Dragon Avatar, representative of the creator's pantheon, detected. Eternal Grudge buff applied. Badger detected, applying random difficulty modifier. Chapter 1895. Mock the Titans. Eternal Grudge buff applied. All Titan God followers deal 50% increased damage. All Titan God followers gain the effect of the Enrage buff. Badger modifier applied, dungeon difficulty at 1.01, X standard. You cheap chintzy dungeon. Give me my difficulty settings. Kara shouted, looking up at the sky. The team members laughed as they realized that the dungeon's random modifier had only changed the difficulty by 1%. That was probably a good thing, as everything in the dungeon was now doing 50% more damage and enraged, which increased the monster's strength and agility. And now the boss was starting to move again. Tion, some buffs, please. The little fox calculated the mana consumption and damage output of the group and decided that Inspiration with its 40% attack speed increase would not be the best call this time. Instead, he played the Hymn of Heroism, which increased skill damage by 50%. But not before getting the fight started in style. There once was a giant named Brock. He washed himself with a goblin sock. His height was short, his arms were weak, too fat to see his. The giant roared as vicious mockery hit him, and Kara patted the little fox on the head. You're getting better at this. Oathbreaker attacked the Titan Archmage's back as it took the first step toward Carl and Tion, distracting the boss and turning it away from the group. That was when Tion began to play the Hymn of Heroism, and everyone felt their skill power increase. A flurry of skills slammed into the boss as the golems charged toward the boss. However, Carl realized that there was an issue. An enraged Titan was enough to overpower Oathbreaker with pure physique, even if it was a mage. So he needed something bigger. First, Behemoth made the pair of Oathbreaker demons larger so they could fight the boss properly. Then, Carl tossed Tion on his back and transformed into the avatar of the World Dragon, a mighty golden-scaled world dragon. Kilo for kilo, he was no weaker than the Titan. And he was larger. There was just one thing missing. When everyone else had charged the platform to engage the boss, Ray had taken the spiders and made a hard left, going for the trash mobs between them and the second boss. That was likely fine. They didn't have enough surface area for 100 spiders to attack one boss, even if he was larger. The Titan didn't miss the enormous dragon charging his way, and Oathbreaker took advantage of that to poke some additional holes in him using the magical swords that Carl had given them. "We've got a problem," Tion noted as Carl smashed the Titan in the face with a spatial quake, enhanced claw. Other than the fact that the boss is supreme ranked. Nope, that pretty much covers it. But I think that the team might start crying. Should I try inspiration instead? The healer laughed at the joking between the two as they fended off the furious attacks of the boss. It wasn't using ranged magic, it had coated its fists in fire to cast explosion on impact. It was incredibly similar to the way that Carl chose to fight in dragon form, but also very Titan in its use of magic. If they could use their strength, they did, even if they specialized in magic. But as a supreme-ranked existence, it got the blessing of the Supreme, which granted a full 99% damage reduction against immortals. What should have taken them half a minute was going to take them most of an hour, assuming that they could survive that long. If the boss started using area magic, it was likely to run the healer out of magic. That wasn't a huge concern for Carl, as the Dryads also healed, and they were incredibly durable. But a drawn-out fight would exhaust everyone, and this was only the first boss. The boss roared as he tried to stomp on Kara, and got a poking stick right between the toes. However, as the boss was enraged, crippling anxiety had minimal effect, and it didn't seem to care that the side effect of crippling agony was in effect as it continued trying to squash the badger. "I think you're going to need the good sword," Tion noted as the giant roared at them, furious that Carl stopped it from reaching the little fox that kept mocking him. Tion wasn't even looking at the boss. He was playing the Hymn of Heroism for the group and blissfully unaware that he was wiggling his backside in the boss' face as he sang and played. "I 100% approve," Kara added with a thought. "Fine, but someone else gets to explain the chaos." Carl activated Blade of Divine Wrath, and the spell coated his claws, layering itself over the buffs of the Blade of Champions that Carl had equipped. The aura of the weapon slammed down on the boss and the rest of the group, nearly forcing them all to their knees as Carl raked the Titan with a flurry of claws. Golden blood flew as the claws shredded flesh, and the Titan's health bar dropped visibly. That was enough to snap the group out of their frozen state, despite the oppressive aura of the skill Carl was using. It almost felt like they were standing in the presence of an angry demigod, but there was something missing. The divine power that a real demigod would radiate naturally, even without trying to. Still, it was overwhelming. Tribulation lightning crackled as Carl's claws hit the Titan, who was now fighting defensively. But Carl had been taking fighting lessons from Kara, and when the Titan grabbed both of his forelimbs, Carl bit down on the creature's face, then doused him in dragon breath. Carl was hurled into the air, getting him away from the boss, but leaving gaping wounds where his teeth were forcibly torn from the Titan's face. He spread his wings to keep from being thrown into another fight entirely, and hovered for a moment as Oathbreaker gathered the creature's attention. Ray was already 3 groups deep in her clearance of the dungeon, using the spider horde to overwhelm the enraged Titans. At this rate, she was likely going to clear every mob pack in the dungeon before they got the first boss down. Chapter 1896. Retaliation. Carl made a strafing run over the boss and found that his dragon breath not only corroded the skin of the Titan, but it actually buffed the Dryads. His breath was a nature element ability, as were the constructs, and the influx of powerful magic increased their abilities for a short time after being exposed, granting them some aspects of the world dragon's breath. However, the Blade of Divine Wrath only worked in close combat and didn't apply its extra damage to all his ranged skills, so Carl was going to have to close the distance again. As he closed the distance, Carl shifted into Tengu form so he could continue to fly, but also get close enough to fight. The power of the Blade of Divine Wrath coated his sword as Carl swooped behind the boss and flicked a half-dozen fast attacks into its back before it realized the threat. The transformation had caught it off guard, and it didn't realize that Carl had gotten close until it was too late. Carl flitted out of the path of its retaliation, and the Titan changed tactics, casting a Flame Blast area explosion so fast that even Kara couldn't stop it with Nullify. The Badger was impressed. It wasn't often that she found an enemy that could get around her favorite methods of trolling mages, but this one had managed it. The spell also didn't have any lingering effects, only the initial burst of damage, so there was nothing else for her to stop. Vines lashed out from the Dryads as the last batch were burned away. But on the flame-coated body of the boss, they didn't last long, and the Dryads were continually trying to regenerate them. They were epic-grade summons, but they were a hybrid of control and healing, not a pure damage summon like Oathbreaker, who was greatly enjoying the chance to hack apart a Titan. The Titan buffed itself with some sort of speed boost, and Kara was flung away again as he parried before Kara nullified the buff. Then he was back in combat again, only to be hit with that flame explosion. The Dryads all had healing auras going, which were keeping everyone healed, but there was a real risk that even with Eternal Lightning, some of these team members might get too shot by that skill. While Carl had a huge amount of damage reduction, and the skill wasn't doing any major damage to him, just the amount that he could ignore with limited invulnerability was half the health of some of the elves. Damn it, the Avatar doesn't even feel those hits. No wonder that guy wasn't worried about the power level, the Berserker complained as a quarter of his health was drained in a single hit. Kara winked at him and cast Limited Invulnerability. If you just had more health, this wouldn't hurt so much. Limited Invulnerability is limited, after all. You need to be properly tanky for it to work the way it's supposed to. The Berserker laughed as he dodged a foot and hacked at the leg of the Titan. He was considered properly tanky. That was his role here in the dungeon. But compared to Carl, you might as well be expecting him to go up 2 ranks at once. There was just no comparison. Can't he tone down that weapon? Nope. It's the only thing that we have which does so much damage. My poking stick does 1% of maximum health per second, and Ray's poison does the same, with up to 5 stacks. But she's gone to clear out the rest of the dungeon, and her poison is likely reduced by the rank difference. Which was why she left, though Kara wouldn't say it. Plus, the stupid boss kept resisting the effects of her poking stick, and she couldn't nullify the enrage effect from the dungeon that was making her best toys ineffective. On the other hand, the toxins from the thorns on the vines that the Dryads were using were really adding up. Even between Carl's attacks, the boss' health was steadily ticking downward. The air shook as Carl increased his speed to make a strafing attack at the Titan's neck, while it was busy with the vines. His blade cut a deep furrow around the monster's throat, and then Carl found himself flung away as a burst of flame hit him. If it weren't for the fact that they had 10 epic Dryads, the group would have wiped by now. The healer was struggling with mana, and everyone was taking half their health and damage every 5 or 10 seconds when the boss used that skill. But they were winning. When the boss finally reached 10% health, it glowed with bright red light, and the magic users immediately brought up every defensive skill that they could use, while the druids gathered the group and encased them in a dome of vines. Carl could see that the boss was burning through its life force to boost its final skill, which Kara had failed to nullify, at least 10 times now. I have to go see a guy about a thing," Tion announced, then vanished back into his space. No way was he taking that hit. "I'm with the fox. I'll go see what Ray is up to." Kara agreed, then teleported to the spider. "Fine, be like that." Carl activated Soul Harvest, and merged with the Haint as he stuck the Blade of Champions into the boss. Soul energy flowed into Carl at a rate so high he could feel his power matrix shaking, but he didn't let up. The red light of the boss was fading as the soul energy powering it was drained away. But it was too late to stop it. The blast detonated, turning the boss to little more than a ball of energy that the Blade of Champions and the Haint were eagerly absorbing, even as Carl was crushed into the ground with his entire body aflame. The blast incinerated both Oathbreakers, tore through the vines and the nature element barrier that the Dryads had created, as well as the defensive spells that the group had erected. However, the Dryads weathered the blast, and their forms shielded the group from the worst of the blast. I get it now. That's it. Hawk cheered from his space. He had finally grasped the last aspect of the fire element that he had been working on, and the Dark Flame Phoenix's power began to soar as he reached into the Ascended Immortal stage. Chapter 1897. Ray cleared the way. Carl rested on one knee as he recovered from the blast, ignoring the fact that his bestial raiment armor was shredded, and his skin was mostly covered in the black mist of his regenerative abilities. The boss was down, and now they could rest and prepare for the next one. But first, a moment to celebrate with Hawk. Good job, Brother Hawk. First to Ascended Immortal, even faster than Ray. The bird laughed as Ray grumbled. She was clearly working harder for her advancement than that lazy bird, who hadn't even come out to fight, and had spent all his time napping and thinking about fire. Carl refreshed his armor and shook off the lingering ache in his muscles from the blast, while trying to ignore the tingling of the massive amount of soul and life energy that were being pulled into his body by the Haint and the Sword of Champions. Mr. Carl, your aura feels a bit unstable. Are you all right? Do you need more time to heal? I see your health as being fully recovered, the healer asked. I'm fine. I just had a bonded beast advance, and I absorbed a bit of excess life energy. Give me a moment, and I will stabilize my power matrix. In the meantime, we can walk to the next boss. Lady Ray has cleared the way for us. The group looked down the path and saw that Carl wasn't joking. There were no more groups between them and the second boss. There were also only 3 bosses in the dungeon, so the spider was likely going to clear everything but the bosses before they got the second one killed. Give me 2 minutes to change my gear a bit. I think that I know what we need for this next fight, Carl decided. The group looked confused, but after the last fight, most of Carl's constructs were destroyed, so they had to wait anyhow. If he didn't bring them up, there was no chance that they were going to be able to deal with another supreme-ranked boss, even if the next one was pure physical damage. That might be easier on Carl, but if the boss hit them all with a cleave-type skill, the effect on the rest of the group wouldn't be any different. They simply weren't built for that sort of abuse, the way that the avatar of the World Dragon was. Carl took out a pair of bracelets and began writing an inscription on them as the group watched. Then, he activated Breath of the World and upgraded the pair to make matching items for himself. Bracelet of Giant Slaying Immortal Rank, Peerless Grade. Deals 500% of skill damage as void damage to members of the Titan clans. Skills and attacks deal 1% of the target's maximum health as poison damage per second, stacking up to 5 times. The healer held up his hand to stop Carl before he put them on. What did you just do? Oh, I'm a Rinmaster. I make items like these as a trade. If you happen across my shop one day, you'll find all sorts of wonderful things there. The whole group of elves simply looked stunned as they read the description of Carl's bracelets. They would stack, one on each wrist to add a massive amount of bonus damage to Titans, plus the poison. Even with damage reduction, the toxic effect would be nearly impossible to ignore. Hey, I want those too. Ray insisted. Carl laughed. You can have one of mine. If I stop to make more, they're going to get distracted. Carl swapped the bracelet with a similar-looking one from his inventory that added lightning damage on hit and increased damage reduction, then put the new one in Ray's space, so she could immediately equip it. Just leave one group before the final boss, so we don't accidentally pull them both at the same time. The elves are already terrified of what is about to happen. Got it, I'll leave one and come back to help. Ladies and gentlemen, are we all full of mana and ready to fight? I will put up a mana pylon next fight to make it easier on everyone. I forgot that not everyone has a deep enough mana pool at Ascended Immortal that they can use skills with impunity. The Berserker sighed. Why do I get the feeling that we're the ones being treated as juniors here? I'm 100% certain that I'm at least 5 centuries older than you are. Not at all. I'm just working with a different frame of reference. Being a traveling immortal has advantages and disadvantages, but one of the biggest ones is not knowing for sure what a region specializes in. That calmed the Berserker a bit. He knew that Carl wasn't making fun of him, and he wasn't the one having issues with his mana pool. But Carl was also far from average, no matter what region he went to, or what immortal world. For someone like him, traveling likely meant between worlds and not just between regions of this continent. The group headed for the second boss, and Hawk came out of his space in Demon Crow form to sit on Carl's shoulder. Wait, wasn't your beast a stone fur divine fox? Oh, I've got several more, but they're not all with me. Hawk was napping earlier, working on his comprehension. Tion, our little fox, will be back before we reach the boss. He needed a snack before coming back out to face another of those bosses. As they approached the second boss, Tion came out and hopped into the arms of the druid who had been doing their healing. In the words of Sister Kara, "Onwards, friend. There is healing to spread." Kara laughed as she sensed Tion's thoughts. She had almost finished the weaker giants with Ray, and they would soon be joining the rest of the group for the boss fight. But her training of their most gullible brother was coming along well. Chapter 1898. How to Boss Mob. Carl stopped the group as they approached the second boss. Ray and Kara have almost finished, so we can all do this boss together, he explained. So fast? All right. Carl began to call back his constructs and then transformed from Tengu back to his new 9-tailed fox form. The elf sighed, while one of the ladies fanned herself dramatically. That form, it's not your real appearance, is it? You're showing off so that people don't get terrified of you. Or is it that you're actually a world dragon and your natural form has an intimidation aura? Carl winked at her. I will admit that this is not my natural form, but the rest you'll have to guess at. I will give away one personal tidbit, though. My wife is a divine foxkin. Now I know that he's just flexing on us. How much luck can one man have? Avatar, overpowered summoner, beast master, married a divine fox, has an adorable kit with innate healing magic. Tion laughed. Oh, that's a great idea. I should call the Dana Mage Mom when I'm in human form. He wouldn't actually do it. Dana would hurt him if he made people think that she had children as a teenager, at an age when most immortals were still in mandatory education. Even Kara couldn't argue with that logic. The spiders and the badger returned to the group, leaving only one group of titans before the final boss for them to clear after this fight. All right, we can get going. Was there anything I need to know about this boss? He looks like a berserker-type warrior. Their own berserker shook his head.
No, that's it.
He's a purely physical damage boss. If you have other gear, you can swap to add physical damage reduction. The boss will use a lot of short-range blade skills, including Whirlwind. Cleave and Rend will hit the back lines, but that's mostly an issue for the healers. Just burn down his health as fast as possible. Carl smiled. In that case, let me introduce you to my friend. Carl used the Amulet of Destruction to upgrade the rank to Mid-Ascended and called out the Spirit Bear Tyrant, then cast Behemoth on it to make it nearly as large as the boss. The bear looked confused, then excited as it saw elves. Elves were good, they smelled like the forest and used nature magic that didn't smell corrupt. But it knew that Carl had called it here because someone was causing trouble. Hopefully it wasn't the elves. Hey bud, the Titans have been acting up today. We're going to beat him until he learns to behave, Carl informed the spirit bear. The bear nodded happily. It would do that, not a problem. First off, where did you even meet a spirit bear tyrant? Secondly, holy crap, that guy's huge. The tyrant laughed, a deep rumbling noise. Carl had made him the perfect size to fight a titan. Carl silently apologized to Oathbreaker and swapped the demons out for another pair of spirit bear tyrants, based on the boss they fought, but left them smaller. The size of the actual boss was more than enough for this fight, with the behemoth, infused one taking all the attention. All right, let's get going. Bears, you're up first. get the big lout turned around, so the delicate sensibilities of our elven friends aren't offended by the expression he makes as we beat him. The bears rumbled with amusement as the elves looked vaguely offended. But once the bears charged, Carl and Ray both hurled themselves at the Titan's back, with 100 spiders following them. Carl shifted back to Tengu form, so he could fly more easily than using a flight skill, and slashed a dozen quick hits into the boss before moving back as the boss exploded with power. It was raw physical element damage, something like shield slam, but all around the boss. And it killed almost all the spiders. Damn, that does some damage. Kara noted. Ray agreed. If she hadn't dodged, that would have seriously hurt. This boss might do only physical element damage, but it did a lot of physical element damage. Even if you geared to reduce it, you would still take a beating. Carl darted back in and reapplied the stacks of poison as the rest of the group spammed damage skills at the boss. The Berserker was doing a delicate dance in and out of close-range combat as the Titan was trying to squish him, or perhaps punt-kick him across the room. Either way, it would not be fun for the much smaller target. With the damage reduction of the boss, the entire group was only burning off a single % of its health every few seconds. But that was faster than they were expecting. Then, Kara made her move. She made a dramatic set of hand gestures, like she was casting some sort of grand magic, and shouted what most would assume was a skill name. 1,000 Years of Death. Her hands folded with the forefingers and index fingers extended, clasping her poking stick between them, and the badger launched herself straight up between the giant's legs. Carl knew what was coming, and prepared to shelter the badger from the fallout of her actions. However, this boss did not appear to be immune to the poking stick of crippling anxiety, despite being enraged. For a split second, he began to turn, then froze, then turned further and howled in agony. While the boss was frozen with indecision, Kara hit him with a nullify, and Carl watched as the enrage effect faded and the boss dropped back to peak immortal. Oh, you're so screwed now, Carl laughed. And the boss really was screwed. Without the 99% damage reduction from being a supreme-ranked boss, its health was in free fall. And the elves had learned something new today. If you could debuff a boss hard enough and nullify their buffs, you could knock a buffed boss's power down enough that they deranked. Chapter 1899. Spider on his back. Of course, that method only worked if the boss was relying on a buff to make it to Supreme. No matter how much you crippled an actual Supreme, they wouldn't lose the benefits of the rank. The second boss fell with barely a complaint, and most of the group still had nearly full mana pools. That would save them a lot of time on the final leg of the dungeon, Carl decided. There was just one group left, and then the final boss so that they could get paid. Even though they were technically the smaller portion of the group, he didn't think that he would have any complaints if he asked for half the loot. With that happy thought in mind, Kara led the procession down the path to the final boss, her stick waving like a conductor. This might be the most surreal experience that I've ever had inside a dungeon. The badger leading the way with her magic wand definitely sets the mood, the healer from the elven group laughed. It's a jolly experience. Today, we get to adventure, pick on new types of bosses, see what happens when a boss is just barely able to cling to supreme rank with buffs, and then at the end we get prizes. Kara agreed. That's a great way to look at it. However, the last boss is going to be a bit of an issue. It's always stronger than the others, and if there is going to be a supreme ranked boss, it's always the first to advance. So, I don't think that you'll be able to burn down its rank like that again. We'll have to grind this out the hard way, 10-on-1 against a boss who takes 100 times more damage than normal. Carl shrugged. Well, we can do that.
It just takes time.
With our friendly neighborhood spirit bears here, we can tank all the physical damage that he throws at us, and then I've got barriers for everything else. Just try to stand behind the bears when he does a larger skill so that they absorb the majority of it, and it doesn't hit the whole group.
All right.
We will try that. The boss doesn't do all physical damage. He can use fire and lightning skills as well. So, you're not going to be able to completely ignore him. However, none of those are true area of effect skills, only wide area directional attacks. If we can get the positioning right, the bears really should be able to block most of the damage, and we will keep them at full health for the fight. The bears weren't sure that they liked this plan that ended with them getting beat up, but the boss needed to be defeated, and they were big. So, they would go along with it and not make Carl order them. Ray was missing her spiders now, but that would just give her more time to fight, she assumed. 100 spiders weren't actually useful against a single boss. They would just cover it and get in the way of anyone else being able to damage it. When skills hit an ally, they didn't cause damage, but they didn't travel through, either. The mobs were dead within seconds, and Ray was waiting at the edge of the boss's activation zone, eager to see what the last fight would look like. But she knew that the honors this time went to the bears, who were going to distract the boss before the rest of them joined in the fight. The bears, able to hear her thoughts through the connection to Carl, charged into combat and turned the 4-armed and 6-meter-tall Titan war chief away from the group. A perfect move to allow Ray to leap onto its back and start punching it full of holes. The rest of the damage started the instant that Ray was on the boss, and the Titan immediately turned to hurl a skill at the group. The largest of the bears was in the way, and the group dove behind it, other than Carl and Kara, who continued their assault, certain that their durability was enough to take at least a few hits from the boss. But the boss wasn't aiming at them. Not yet. It was aiming to do the most damage to the least durable targets in the area, the proper way to reduce the threat level of a group of adventurers. Ray laughed as the giant realized that so much of the pain it was suffering was actually from a spider on its back, and then had Carl shrink her using unobtrusive behemoth so that she could be no larger than a dinner plate and able to attack freely with the Titan's whole back exposed to the rest of the group. As with most muscular humanoids, it could not reach the center of its back. It had to flail blindly with a sword to try to dislodge her. But Ray was much faster, and every time the attempt to clear her came around, she simply moved. That turned the fight into less of a battle and more of a comedy show, as the Titan flailed around, trying to dislodge a spider that wouldn't move even when you hit it with flame spells. The boss was so frustrated with the bears and the spider that it was barely even paying attention to the elves. All the attacks were targeted in melee range, and the second set of arms, which would normally make him a fearsome combatant, were fully occupied trying to get Ray off his back. While he was supreme, and he could do a lot of damage in a normal scenario, this was most definitely not his day. And that was giving the elves ideas for the next time that they came here. They just needed to find someone with spider-type golems. They certainly wouldn't risk a ranger's pet in the same way that Ray was fighting. They were not that sort of creature. Chapter 1900. Dungeon complete. After nearly an hour of farcical comedy where the boss was lured and distracted by Carl's team, the battle was finally over, and a shining gold and purple treasure chest stood in the middle of the building where they had fought the final boss. Well done, ladies and gentlemen. Now, it's time to claim our rewards. Did someone on your team happen to have a luck buff? If not, we can have the badger open the chest. That tends to give unpredictable, but better than average, rewards.
Carl offered.
The elves silently shook their heads. None of them had a skill or bonus that would help them get better rewards from the dungeon. If they had such a skill, they wouldn't have to look for random groups at the entrance. Their presence would be in huge demand every time they showed up. But Carl didn't seem to mind about that, or the fact that the next time he showed his furry ears in public, he was going to be swarmed by admirers, not just for his appearance, but for his dungeon skills. There wasn't much that would convince them to keep quiet about the situation, especially if they actually did get better than average loot from a supreme-ranked boss group. All 3 bosses had been supreme, though one died an immortal, so they weren't sure how that would be counted by the dungeon. Likely the same as the immortal-ranked packs that granted mediocre benefits to the group and only usually dropped trash items or crafting materials. Little did they know it was actually the crafting materials that Carl was after. Now that they had started to gather more talented people, he wanted materials that they couldn't just make with the earth manipulation skill so that they could turn out truly powerful and unique items. Tion might be reluctant to craft most of the time, due to his aversion to anything that might make him less fluffy and cute. But soon he would learn the advantages of the disheveled little boy appearance in getting Lotus to take care of him. The more of a mess he made of himself, within reason, the more time that the cleric would spend brushing out his fur afterwards. It wasn't like she minded. Tion laughed as he heard Carl's thoughts, but still didn't want to get Ash and sit in his fur. At best, he would do it in humanoid form, and then it would just be in his hair and on his ears. But that was annoying too. It was almost ticklish when you got forge soot into the crevasses of your ears. Kara agreed with that. Ears were sensitive, and if you got soot or dirt into them, it was a nightmare to deal with unless you had someone around to assist. Lotus would do it for you, but if she wasn't there and you had to endure, better to just return to your space so you could leave it behind. That was the only truly reliable way of getting rid of embedded dirt. All right, take care of the chest. I would like to see what the avatar of the World Dragon and a Chaos Badger combine to add to the luck of the draw in the dungeon. Carl patted Kara on the head and sent her on her way, knowing that he didn't have an active skill to improve dungeon loot. If he did, Kara would cling to him like glue, and they would always be going somewhere. The badger loved loot. Kara tapped the box, and the chest burst with purple light. Then the chest opened, and instead of showing them a bunch of loot just on the ground by the boss, or directly into their inventory, the items were floating in the air for them to inspect. The group stared at the items and then turned to Carl with shocked faces. There are epic grade supreme ranked items here. More than one of them. Carl nodded. That's about what I would expect from the dungeon. I am surprised it didn't give us one peerless grade item with stats so strange nobody would actually want to use it, but perhaps our luck is on the downswing today. If this is the downswing, I would love to be around for the upswing. One epic grade item is already a win, especially in a low supreme ranked dungeon. Most of the time it will drop 1 or 2 epic ranked peak immortal items, and that is already considered good loot. But we've got no fewer than 6 of them here, plus piles of raw, ore, and gems. Those will sell well if nobody wants them. Carl raised his hand. The Darklight Host is a crafting guild. I don't mind giving up the items and taking the supreme ranked materials instead. We can turn them over to our senior craftsmen and have something made that matches our members. Oh, well, that changes things. That's an epic item for half the group and rare items for the others, with a bunch left over. I'm surprised that it gave that much raw material, but that might be because it was you here and you who triggered the Titans to enrage. That was not an effect that I have seen before. Usually, it just tells us that the dungeon's difficulty is at a certain level based on the group. This is sort of the same thing, but with a bit more malice, since the Titan gods are not big fans of the creator's pantheon. What's up with that, anyhow? What do your gods need to do to upset the Titans that much? Carl shrugged. It's a bit of a long story, but as I understand it, the Titans once tried to kidnap a goddess from the creator's pantheon, and she burned one of their divine cities to the ground. They're still mad about it. And your goddess isn't? She didn't lose, did she? She might be mad about being kidnapped, but in the end she was the one that came out on top of their contest.